Hello and welcome to the Northeast Ohio Media Group Candidate Debates. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brenda Cain. Today we're hosting the debate for the Solon Ward 1 race and up for election on November 3rd. The candidates will introduce themselves in just a moment, but first here are the rules. We will start with a 1 minute for each candidate to introduce themselves and explain why they're running. Then we'll ask the questions, giving each candidate 90 seconds to answer and a minute for any follow-up. At the end, we will allow for 10 minutes for the candidates to ask one another questions, with 60 seconds permitted for their response. So let's get started. Ms. Jacob, let's start with you.
I'm Sue Jacob. I'm a resident of Solon for the last 33 years. I've been in the ward for 28 years, and I'm running for council because I believe that my long service with Solon and my involvement, I have extensive volunteerism in the city of Solon, helped qualify me for this position on top of the fact that I have a very strong business background. And I believe I can transfer a lot of the skills that I use in my day job to help us in the city of Solon continue to improve.
Great. Mr. Magill.
Hi, I'm Doug Magill. I'm running for Ward 1 and City Council, and I've never run for office before. But what I found is that I'm really excited about the opportunity of learning a lot more about the city of Solon and helping the city of Solon. This is a great opportunity to do something for Solon. It's been great to my family and myself, and I'm looking forward to this.
Okay. Let's start off by talking about probably the biggest issue facing the city today, which is traffic. Generally, the biggest discussions have centered around that problems on Aurora Road. Do you support widening the roadway to 5 lanes as the city engineers have discussed, or do you support the mayor's plan to have a new interchange built off State Route 422 to funnel traffic around the city? Mr. Magill?
Well, a couple of things we need to clarify. I don't know if that's the biggest issue facing the city, but it's a big one today. I think the city engineers have already talked about widening, and that's going to cut some frontage off of some property both on Aurora Road and Som Center Road. So this is going to be a big project, but we've got to do something relative to downtown traffic. Otherwise, we've got a real problem. It's a nice problem to have because that means people are coming in and out of Solon to work. But the other thing, relative to the interchange potentially near Liberty Road, that's a really long-term project, and there's a lot of funding involved in that. So I'm not sure we're going to see a resolution to that issue anytime soon.
Okay. Mrs. Jacob.
I believe that the 5-road approach that was talked about in the $19 million it would take to do that, as Doug said, will cause a lot of disruption for residents. But the bigger issue was not only is it a disruption for the benefits, but the residents, but who's going to get the big benefit? Putting in that approach was really going to be more of a benefit for the Bainbridge and Aurora residents, and we would get the pain and they would get more of the gain. So I don't believe that's the first approach we should do for that reason at all. And we're also going to be crimping in a little bit to the road easements just for the expansion that's planned for the double lanes next year as it is. So we are going to be encroaching into the Ohio areas and et cetera, just trying to make it so that it's 4 lanes each way and we can try to speed it up on a short-term basis. And that work is already planned for next year as it is. But the long-term plan, feasibility-wise, that would be a nice expansion with the JED to do something like that, but it is something that's much more long-term for us, and it's not something that residents today with their problems getting through a town will see any relief from anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Do either of you have any other thoughts on it?
Yeah, my sense is that Bainbridge itself isn't all excited about this as much as we are, and so I think the big problem is negotiating with Bainbridge to find out a way to make it happen. And so, you know, it's not short term.
It's true, because Bainbridge likes the revenue stream they get from the businesses, and it doesn't bother them that our residents have to be inconvenienced with all the traffic to and from their homes. So they don't have the incentive we do to make this change, but I think the city is right in trying to force the study and try to get them to take action and really do it in the real spirit of regionalization and joint development.
Okay. Let's move a little further down 91 with traffic issues. Twinsburg is about to put in some roundabouts down there. There's a new traffic light at Lisa Lane. There's a lot of concern that that's going to just bog everything down at that end of the city. Ms. Jacobs, what's your thoughts on that?
Actually, I think long-term, I'm excited that it's going to be a step. Twinsburg took a little long to get to the table. It's not the long-term solution. It's just two roundabouts on the front end, closest to Solon on the south side. They need to do a lot more in terms of widen the roads all the way down that stream. But I do believe that that's a step in the right direction for appeasing things. But I believe that one step back from that, it's the traffic study, the traffic light project that they're almost done with in the city in terms of doing all the fiber optics. Those next 6 or 8 weeks, we're going to be able to figure out how much more do we really need in terms of how much will the lighting of the new structure and the computerized maximizing the turns and right and left, how much has that helped? And if that doesn't help, what else should we do? I think we need to consider left and right turn lanes more off of Pettibone to 91 north and south. That's more disruptive for our ward residents. So I think we need to look at all those things with engineering once we get past doing piece by piece the 9 million that Twinsburg's doing.
Well, I know Twinsburg's having fun with this. I was really surprised at the intersection they put in place at Richmond Road and Pettibone when they put a roundabout there. I was really surprised at that. It really worked pretty well, surprisingly. But now if they're going to do another one just south of Lisa Lane there, it'd be kind of interesting to hear what our mayor has to say about that, because I know she fought hard for that light at Lisa Lane. But you know, Twinsburg's got to step up to the plate. I think Sue's right on that one. They've got to widen traffic down there. There's not a lot of other things our traffic engineers are working on right now other than this traffic light study, which will be done at the end of November. But it could create a problem, and we're going to have to negotiate with Twinsburg. But that's one of the key traffic problems that we will be faced. 91 just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Any other thoughts before we move on?
Infrastructure-wise, we're talking just roads in 91. I think the fact that they were able to get grant money for next summer to do everything north of the freeway up to the north line, and then work that they're trying to do, putting in applications for, I believe, a loan approach for the Richmond Road work as well. You know, you've got to give kudos to the planning department for trying to do so much to work on infrastructure. And if you look at the old city survey from 2012, and that was one of the hot buttons for Solon residents since 2001, and then again in 2012, it's infrastructure. So we have to keep investing because the number of cars is not going down.
No, it's an interesting problem we faced. Actually, that ODOT grant for 91 repairs north is a significant project. That's going to tie up things for a little while as well. So we just have to keep residents apprised of the fact that most of that money is coming from that. It's a higher percentage than it normally is, which is pretty interesting that we were able to do that. So there's a lot going on relative to traffic.
Let's talk about some other issues. In the past year, specifically the past months, the city's enacted some legislation about different things, only to rescind it like a few weeks or a month or two after that. Do you feel that council sometimes moves too fast when making decisions? And if so, what would you do to try and slow the process down? Ms. Jacobs?
I'm assuming you're talking about the cul-de-sac project. The committee did take months to actually come up with that plan. If you follow the minutes on that, they really did take their time trying to come up with a solution with the law director. But at the end of it, we were in a situation where when you're trying to do legislation for maybe one person, maybe you need to stop and say, can we manage the bad performance or the improper performance without having over government in terms of tons of ordinances to accommodate it. But I think the city did the right thing, and I'm glad the mayor realized that the terminology of that ordinance would have made it almost impossible to actually enforce. If 6 people live around a cul-de-sac, are all 12 people that are on their deeds going to be accountable for not maintaining it, and they have no legal right to that property? I voiced concern on that as well, and I would have been on the minority on that side as well, but I believe the city did the right thing. So sometimes you just need to slow down and listen, but if not, respect the fact that at least the mayor noticed that that wasn't the right thing and stopped and said, let's rephrase.
Mr. Magill.
No, I don't think council moves too fast on things. I think they spent due deliberation on this kind of issue. But that's their job, and they're representing diverse interests. I suspect that a couple of the council members that voted for that particular piece of legislation were dealing with some unhappy residents that wanted them to solve a problem for them. On the other hand, I think the process worked the way it's supposed to work. The mayor made the decision. I think it was a good decision. I'm not sure I want to be in the position of telling residents they have to spend money for something they're not responsible for. I think that's, shows the democratic process at work in a good way.
I'm just curious, there will be a point that one of you will be dealing with an unhappy resident. How would you try and calm some nerves or tempers, whatever the issue might be? Mr. Magill?
Okay. Well, the first part of that question is, I think that's a given. There's always going to be residents that are unhappy with things that are going on or something that's related to them. An example of that is when I was campaigning on Liberty Road. One person told me, we need sidewalks on Liberty Road. And the very next door, by the way, don't let that guy next door tell you that we need sidewalks on Liberty Road. We don't need sidewalks on Liberty Road. It take away the character of the neighborhood. So by definition, if you're in an elected position, you're going to get people that have differing opinions. And part of it has to do with the nature of being a council person. You got to like people, you've got to like listening to them, you got to be sympathetic, and you've got to believe that they have real issues. If they see that, feel that you're empathetic, then it's easier to get them to calm down because they trust you to try and do the right thing for them. It's a personality thing more than a resume thing.
Ms. Jacobs, do you have thoughts?
It's funny that he picked that example because I was at the same two houses, and I'm not exaggerating, and one person was extremely emphatic one way and the next person was extremely emphatic the other. But the point is still valid that it's not a question of personality, or it's a question of style and approach and how you deal with people. Whether it be your day job or just your personal life, you can't please everybody, but it's how you approach the process and get people to understand you've got to be in the middle sometimes, and maybe not everybody can't get exactly what they want, but here's what we're trying to do and make sure they understand that we're all doing it for the right reasons and try to get them to understand it. So it's all a question of how you communicate and be honest to the person that you're doing the best you can.
Okay, great. The city has a pretty healthy economic community, but it has very little retail. I know you're both longtime residents, so you'll probably remember that years ago there were 2 plans for lifestyle centers in Solon, much like Legacy Village, that never really went anywhere. Would you like to see shopping within the city limits? And how would the city handle that in your vision? Ms. Jacobs?
I would love to see that, and the residents would have said that from the surveys, and I believe they're looking at that again when they're looking at the 2015 master plan, is how to address the aging of the different shopping centers and how they could rework them. I believe last time, as you know, it was more of an economic issue and funding, and then some of the residents didn't want the encroachment into their neighborhoods as well. But at the end of the day, when people say they really want to be able to come in Solon and buy a pair of shoes or get a dress and not drive out of town, we should be able to support that long term, and we have a lot of space and opportunities to do so. And I think the economic development director for Solon is trying hard with regular meetings with brokers and et cetera, trying to get stimulus to get people to come into town to help fill spaces where we know that there's definitely a need for an upside, because they're aging and they don't look as nice as we would like them to be in Solon. And we need more than just our homes to look nice. We need our community to be a destination as well.
Mr. Okay.
Well, one of the things that I heard in walking around Solon was, how much people cared. They really wanted to see a vision of what the city of Solon will look like a few years down the road. And this aging infrastructure issue, I know the city has a plan to review all of their own buildings every 5 years. And they're looking at a number of economic development things, but I think it's something broader than that. This is one of the things that the residents really talked to me about was, you know, what's Solon going to look like? How do we get people to want to come to Solon, to make it a destination city and not a drive-through city? We have those 2 shopping centers where Earth Fair used to be and where Sears and Kmart used to be. And a lot of people talked about, well, what can we do with those? The lifestyle kind of concept is one, but it requires, I think, this time, the city to have a vision of this is what we want it to look like. Hudson did that. You know, they took that area west of 91 and turned it into kind of a retail parking area, which was really neat. You know, we can do something similar, and I've talked to a bunch of people that do that kind of work. It's possible, but we have to have the vision in the city to talk about, we want it to look like this, we want it to be a destination. Remember, we talked about frontage being lost on 91 and Aurora Road, which is going to crimp the retail establishments that are there. We need to offer them alternatives. So this is a real opportunity for us in the city to provide leadership, to give a vision of what, you know, would get people excited about their city.
Any thoughts?
Consistent, again, we're not far off on where we're approaching these things. We do believe that there's opportunities for improvement. We have to make sure, though, that people can, as I mentioned, I want them to be able to make a destination in Solon and Hudson and Chagrin. People go there and spend a night, have dinner, and comfortable walking around. You have impediments in Solon with the way the structure is that you can't just walk around comfortably and spend the night and go get an ice cream cone and walk around. So we do need to look at the long-term strategy and make sure we can do those things, but we also have to be cognizant of the fact that people up on Harvard are going to be building a very large structure up that direction, and how much retail can an area actually support. So for us, we have a lot of opportunities to fill the space, but we have to be able to maintain those doors so that they stay open. And again, I think there's a lot more opportunities for restaurants as well. People come when there's a lot of restaurants. It doesn't have to be just shopping. So I think we have a lot of opportunities to get more of a flavor and a feel to our community, so people want to stay at home on a Friday night.
Interesting. You referred to Solon, Mr. Magill, as a drive-through. You've referred to it as a potential destination. There is not a lot of walkability in Solon. How do we achieve that in the city, Ms. Jacob?
They're starting to try to do some of those things. They're adding sidewalks to the plans up on Cannon. You know, the intent was to do more there this year. I think they were doing some construction up there at the up in that corner, but they're going to be tying it all the way down to the Metro Park, so people can do more of a walk all the way from Nestle's and Cannon all the way down. They've got at least 2 councilmen that have gone to their constituents on Liberty and et cetera, and said, do you want not just bike paths, do you want to have sidewalks for your areas? And as we ran into, you're going to have people that are on one side or the other, so the next step was to ask the councilman to go back and have meetings with their local residents and get them to decide how much do they actually want of those conveniences, what's important to them, the sidewalks or the bike paths. So we need to do something to make it a little bit more walkable. And all the construction that's planned for the infrastructure changes, every road change we're talking about, is still going to come with more additional sidewalks and walking plans. So their intent is still to make further improvements in that area.
We've had, you know, an aging McDonald's moved out of town earlier this year. The Sunoco station at the corner of Salmon and Aurora is set empty for about 6 years now. What would you like to see come into those areas? How would you like to see those empty lots now developed and some of the more aging portions of the business district? How would you like to see that developed?
More gelato stores. Actually, you know, Solon has to get a reputation of being open for business, particularly for small retailers. Interestingly enough, when you go to some of the planning meetings, I think there's a lot of energy there. A lot of people want to do things, but they are a little hesitant to deal with all of the bureaucratic issues. We've got to make it easy for people to do this. We've got to find a way to let them know we want small business to start up, and that's how some of these other things grow organically. We have the responsibility to have a vision. to say this is where we want retail, this is where we want walking spaces. One of the things that got people excited when I was walking around campaigning was, you know, if we talked about converting that old Burlington Northern, you know, right-of-way into a bike trail all the way out to Grantwood and connecting that, you know, that got people excited, you know, that they could do something like that. And if you do something like that, then the kind of retail that grows up around that is the kind of places that people want to ride their bike to go, you know, have lunch or have dinner, and a shoe store maybe next door, something like that, or a bike store.
Ms. Jacobs?
We also have to work on the limitations we have with some of the owners of the properties. And the property you're talking about with the Sunoco that's been sitting there, that when you have a common owner that affects literally 3 or 4 properties, and whether they allow access from one to another, can be a huge impediment to doing an improvement in that area. Dunkin' Donuts wants to have a drive-through, but if the owner of that property won't allow that transgress rights, they're not going to be able to get the growth they need. So part of it is trying to get the owners of some of those properties to understand the big picture, that vision, that it is good for them to have someone active in all the 4 parts of their parcels, not just 3 and having an empty Sunoco spot. And we know the Sunoco station is probably going to come down pretty soon, but the fact of the matter is it's an eyesore to have that as a center of our town. And we all know that, you know, we would be better having businesses in those locations, and there's plenty that everybody in watching the show could come up with that would be better for us to have locally. And the general question on the aging of the facades, a lot of those facades need to be improved. And there definitely needs to be that. And I believe, again, I think that's in the master plan. There's specific instructions about what they want done next to keep those developments to get a little fresher. Because nobody wants them to look old. We don't want to look like a suburb that's not maintaining our retail space, and we need them full, not open. So I believe that's what I would say, is you have to work not only with the owners, but with the businesses that are there today. Okay.
Well, Visconti owns that property, and they just announced that they're being sued relative to, you know, the property with the old Sunoco station. They'll fix it one way or another. They may take the whole building down, but that doesn't solve the problem, because, as we said, the 91 Aurora, you know, expansion is going to take frontage away. So you're going to have a hard time finding a vendor that wants to go in there and take that. That makes it incumbent upon the city of Solon to come up with a vision of what can we do with that property, and maybe the properties around it, because they're going to be under pressure as well. We have to provide the vision. We have to provide the leadership, and give the residents a sense that, wow, we do have a vision of something that can make this an exciting place. If we don't do that, nothing's going to change.
I do believe, though, that the city is offering some guidance to some of those people. Whether they choose to accept that approach is a different story, but I know they have been reaching out. And over the years, if you look at how many new people have come to town, it's not as if they're sitting on their hands saying, let's just let stuff happen. They have been going out, and we have increased the number of employers, a number of businesses in Solon, and the number of employees. So I know they're trying to do so, but it's a two-way street. You know, they need to have someone work with them, and they have to want it to be done, and I believe they do want it to be done.
Yep, they're looking for us to provide it.
Okay. Earlier this year, the city and a group of, let's call them preservationists, squared off over the Lynch home. Many residents believe that the current climate in city leaves no room to save some of the city's history. Should more be done to keep the few remaining historical structures in the city, or do you feel like progress, that they may be impeding some of the progress that the city can make? Ms. Jacobs.
I think more is starting to be done. I believe there's discussions being had between Mr. Shimmons and the mayor at this point, more so than there were before. There was definitely more of an impasse, I understand, before. And the intent to actually gut out but keep the frame of the house and do things there to make it more of a destination for some kind of historical event or a second historical building. I believe that's back now on the table, but I do love the idea that that should be, and it's naturally to be so, with the arts facility right beside it and having the Historical Society building there. It's a nice area that should be able to be expanded to be our old history area. And I think there's value to that. And if you look at what our residents want, they really do value the arts and our history. So if we can do that, that's time and money well spent to try to support those initiatives.
I think the city can provide some impetus for that in terms of some seed money. A lot of that, I think, should be left up to private donors and private organizations. Our main focus has got to be on what we look like in the long term. Respecting the past is important. There are things that we can do to help that, but the Lynch House by itself is kind of symbolic of, are we dealing with the old Solon or the new Solon? And what does that new Solon look like? That's what we should be talking about. And then we can incorporate something like this into the framework of that past. I honestly believe that it's not just the Art Center and the Lynch House, it's the area around it. What are we doing with all of that? And if we have a vision again, and I'm going to keep harping on this subject, because this is what I heard from the residents. They want to hear that from us. They want to feel that sense of excitement that we believe that there are things we can do for the city, and because they feel that way. It's been an astonishing eye-opener for me how passionate people are about these things. So yes, invest in a little bit, try and get private donors to help with the rest of it, but come up with something that's not just those two locations, but the rest of it.
Okay. Has to expand past that. It does. It's a no-brainer that it's got to be a bigger area to have that feeling. But the question specifically was about that house in general, and that's a key pin to that. And I believe the Historical Society is manning up a lot of contribution in that regard as well. They're not expecting the city to pay their way for that. That was part of the negotiations, but there are a lot of areas close by there that could make a nice area that's expanded.
Okay. Last question. Solon has been as a municipality has been accused of being a standalone, but then again, more and more in the past few months, the mayor has been reaching out and trying to partner with neighboring communities on projects. Where do you stand on regionalism, Mr. Magill?
Well, I think it's going to be an essential part of our future. Interestingly enough, I had a conversation with the police chief about this a couple weeks ago. And, he said, look, we've got the capability of providing, emergency services and coordination around us, and it would be a revenue generator for us. I think he was pretty excited about it. It was an interesting conversation. But there are other areas where I think we can partner with other communities to do things that are a benefit to all of us. One of the interesting things that happened was we got rid of our tax department and brought in Rita. That's a regionalism kind of thing. Now, in that case, I'm not so sure it worked as well as we hoped it would, and that may need to be revisited. But there are other areas where we can provide services to other communities, and other communities perhaps can provide services for us. That's a benefit. I think we're going to have a lot of discussion relative to that, as long as we maintain the uniqueness of Solon and what it is, then those other things become possible and important.
Okay. Yes, okay. I think the regionalization approach that we're taking is actually pretty good, because it's making sure that all of our residents who are paying and used to a standard of service are not going to go backwards as a result of any regionalism that they're looking at. Again, I spoke to Chief Island as well, and I'm aware of the shared services from whether it's the Shaker and the Twinsburg sharing the jail and the revenue generation, and that's great when you can take a fixed asset and get more use out of it and save money and generate money. That's a good example. The dispatch center, I know they've looked at one that didn't have the best opportunity for our residents. If at the end of it all, we don't get better service for it, and we get one vote, and we are the gorilla in the room, we have the big percentage of the volume, is it in our residents' best interest to join together now with a bunch of smaller cities that would each get the same vote as us in developing the management of a common dispatch center. I like the approach they're doing. They're analyzing each one individually on a case-by-case basis. And as we get ready to get more to the state approach of minimizing the number of entities that actually do those things, this will allow us to pick and choose the one that's best for our residents. We're used to quality service. And I think the approach they're doing is excellent. Analyze each one as a business and decide it's right for our constituents.
Okay, great. Now it's your turn. Do you have questions or thoughts you'd like to pitch it to one another?
Well, I got to knock on every single door in the ward. And what was fascinating to me is how many people responded. A lot of times you knock on the door and people are like, okay, what do you want? And then after you explain that you're running for city council, they usually react pretty well. They say, oh, okay, and then they take time to talk to you. And if you take time to talk to the people of the city and listen to them, they've really got a lot to say. One of the things that came through clearly is how important the schools are. And back earlier in the session when I mentioned that there are other important issues relative to the city, we have a funding shortfall issue, $2.2 million, relative to the governor's line item veto that was recently happened. We've got to solve that problem, and so we've got to work with the legislature to do that. But people are very concerned about that. We had a number of people that have moved into the city from places like Cleveland Heights or Shaker Heights because of the school system. So that's really got to be our most urgent issue, how we solve that problem and how we deal with it. The second thing is economic development. You know, in my years as an officer of a major corporation and in running my own business, I found that you know, if you talk to business people and really help try and understand what they do and how they need to succeed, they're willing to invest. But we've got to make that argument with them. And the third thing is this vision thing. What was really important to these people was they want to be proud of their city. They want to feel that Solon is a great town. They love the rankings, but the problem is they don't feel that it has the cachet, you know, of a Hudson or Chagrin Falls. And they're catching up to us in a lot of ways. So we've got to be willing to make the investment, put the time and energy in to come up with that vision so that this is a place that people want to come to, not only because it's got great schools, because it's a great place to live and do things.
Thank you.
That's what we need to be focusing on.
Ms. Jacobs.
Take that one step further. I think that we all came to Solon for the schools. But if you look today, 65% of the people that are in households in Solon don't have children in the school anymore. And the question is, what's keeping them there? And as you talk to people, and I've walked the ward, you know, I went twice around the ward this summer and talked to people, more than a few were looking to move for downsizing for just because they were ready to move on, but so many people said, we raised our children here. We love it here. We want to stay here. We came for the schools, but we want to stay for the city, and we love the services. And that's true, the services have been very good. But we have to have a continued growth, and I think that was the message I heard from walking around was, we can't just stop on our laurels and say we're going to rest on the fact the schools are really good and that the housings are starting to rebound. What are we going to do to keep getting better? And that's where I believe there's an awful lot that can be done on continuous improvement in every department that we deal with, to look for ways to get better, whether it's having a group of people that have expertise and have them talk about a problem with builders and residents that have strengths and come up with ways to be considered, we should be doing that. If it's a question of taking a look at how we do purchasing and see if we can change something about when we actually purchase things so we get more bidding to get us better pricing. There's a million things you can do under the auspices of Six Sigma, continuous improvement. And I believe that people want to get better. They're not happy with just staying the way we are. So I think there's an awful lot we can do from economic development. It crosses every area, economic development, infrastructures, fleet management, purchasing. Everyone you want to talk about can have a value from putting in a continuous improvement project and looking to get better and doing it joint. Doing things by, not just by yourself and talking to a few people, but cross-functional teams with people that have expertise, that will help us because we have a lot of intelligent people in Solon that could help us.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned continuous improvement. We've got a budget of $39.6 million this year, and our revenue is expected to exceed that by anywhere from $3 to $6 million. What do you think we should do with that?
Part of that money in that unrestricted funds is going to be used for waste reclamation improvements. I think there's about $10 million being earmarked for that. But some of that money, I think they've also got a grant in place for a lean training to take a look at their managers and have the managers come up with good ideas to help improve services to all of our residents. Is there a quicker way to get a work permit for your house, for construction permits? Look, there's nothing that should be off the table. Everything can be looked at, and money should be spent for that, and maybe we should also look at potential development things that the city could do with the property and their resources, and it should be considered with proper researching.
Well, I mean, all of that, it sounds like a lot of studies and spending more money, but the question is, should we be reducing taxes? Should we be trying to encourage seniors to stay by special tax rebates to them?
Well, actually, we're doing the first one is what's planned, the reduction in the sewage minimums. 2,300 residents are going to get the benefit of that $100,000 savings, because instead of them having to pay a minimum amount when they're not using this, they're starting to give that money. But if you look at the grand total of unrestricted money in the dollars, part of this is in preparation money for the Cadillac taxes that are going to start hitting the city further down the road, and that will be dependent upon the negotiations that happen with the unions, how much money is actually going to be available of that funds.
Yeah, that's next year.
It's further than that.
But the question is, you know, we have a surplus, and our budget stabilization fund is really pretty sizable. You know, shouldn't we be giving some of that back to the residents?
The net unrestricted is going to be around $20 million in the unrestricted fund. The Solon Schools unrestricted is a little over 30, or it's about 27 million unrestricted. There's a minimum amount that you need to keep, and I don't know that we're over that level at this point.
Do you have a question for your opponent on any issues?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. Remember to vote on November 3rd, and this debate will be posted on cleveland.com shortly, so you have a chance to review it. Thank you for joining us. Good night.